The first thing you hear isn't silence, it's noise. Street hawkers calling prices, roosters that refuse to shut up, and a baby screaming through paper-thin walls. Welcome to your Roman morning. You're not in a villa with mosaics and fountains. You're in an insular Rome's version of an apartment building. Think of it as a Jenga tower of brick and timber, one strong breeze away from collapse. You live high up third, maybe fourth floor, which means you're poor. The rich stay close to the ground where it's safer. Up here, if the ceiling doesn't drop plaster on your head, the rickety stairs might finish the job. Your room is tiny, more boxed than home, with walls that sweat in summer and freeze in winter. A hole in the wall passes for a window, letting in more smoke than sunlight, and sometimes a pigeon bold enough to help itself. Your bed is nothing more than straw that crunches with every turn and crawls with things you'd rather not think about. The blanket smells like mildew and despair. Furniture, not unless you count the chamber pot glaring from the corner. Kitchen, absolutely not. One spark, and the whole block goes up in flames. The fire brigade exists, sure, but mostly to protect the wealthy, not you. As for possessions, you don't have much. Chipped cup, a tunic with more patches than fabric, and if you're lucky, a comb that's seen better days. Privacy, forget it. The walls are so thin, you're forced into the lives of strangers every cough, every whispered prayer, every argument, every sigh. You know your neighbors too well, in ways you wish you didn't. This isn't luxury. This isn't comfort. This is survival in the Roman Empire, one day at a time. The air is thick with smoke, mildew, and the unmistakable aroma of unwashed humanity. Somewhere below, someone's already baking bread, but not for you. Outside, vendors shout prices for figs and fish guts, while in the distance, a centurion bellows orders at some unlucky soul who's probably bleeding already. You haven't even stepped outside, yet you're sweating, itchy, and inhaling a fine dusting of lead, courtesy of Rome's plumbing. Welcome to your workday. You're not an emperor, not a gladiator, just another nameless tenant in a crumbling insula, hoping you don't tumble down the stairs or offend a city god before noon, and the day has barely begun. First order of business, your bladder. No bathroom in your apartment, no sink, no flush, not even a bucket with dignity. Instead, you shuffle down the street, clutching your chamber pot and whatever scraps of modesty you still have, toward the latrine of Rome's idea of a public restroom. Calling it public is generous. It's more like a social lounge for people comfortable making eye contact while relieving themselves. A long stone bench lines the room, punctured with holes. Neath it trickles a shallow stream, carrying away the collective shame of the city's poor. You sit, you Durand, pray the neighbor beside you doesn't feel like starting a conversation. Privacy, none. Doors don't exist. Men haggle grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier complains about his sciatica, and across from you, a man calmly eats olives while staring you down like it's a duel. Then comes the real joy, the torsorium. A communal sponge on a stick, soaking in vinegar or salt water, theoretically clean. In reality, it's seen horrors best left unspoken. You wipe with caution and a silent prayer. If you're rich, maybe you had moss. If you're lucky, maybe you brought your own rag. Otherwise, congratulations, you've just shared the city's most intimate accessory. Don't even think about skipping this ritual in an alley. Rome has laws against public urination, and fines are very real. Enforcement is not subtle. When you're finished, do you wash your hands? Of course not. No soap, no running water, just a grimy communal basin touched by more strangers than a politician's handshake tour. You leave the latrina lighter, but also slightly more dead inside. Welcome to Rome. Now, on to breakfast. The Romans called it the ientaculum, word that promises more than it delivers. Your feast, a hunk of stale bread and a splash of watered-down wine. A fortune smiles, maybe a scrap of cheese or a few olives. Forget coffee, forget bacon, forget anything resembling joy. Breakfast isn't about satisfaction, It's about survival. It doesn't fill you. It doesn't comfort you. It simply keeps you alive long enough to face the rest of the misery waiting outside. You were just trying to go buy lentils. Your bread is likely Panis rusticus, a rough, chewy lump of grit baked yesterday or the day before. It's dense enough to qualify as a weapon and textured like limestone. The wine is diluted because even they knew that being drunk before sunrise in ancient Rome was a bad idea, unless you were a senator. There's no kitchen in your apartment. So, you eat this meal standing in the street or squatting beside a fountain, alongside other equally unenthused citizens, gnawing on bread like flavorless tree bark. If you've got a bit of oil or a smear of garum, Rome's famously salty fermented fish sauce, then congratulations. You've added aromatic horror to your already bleak meal. If you're wealthy, maybe you get fruit or honey, but you're not. You're a normal Roman citizen, just rich enough to not be enslaved and just poor enough to envy your neighbor's broken jug of goat milk. Sometimes vendors walk by selling hot chickpea fritters or honeyed pastries, and for a moment you feel hope, but you remember your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's sympathy. So you bite your bread and pretend it's cake. And this is how the day starts, with carbs, mild dehydration, and a growing realization that you're about to walk 7 miles on Roman sandals with nothing but stale crumbs in your stomach and a buzz from last night's leftover wine. It doesn't get better, because now it's time to go to work. After your hearty breakfast of bread and mild despair, it's time to face the Roman workday. And let's be clear, unless you're a senator, a poet with a patron, or one of the lucky few who inherited land from a dead uncle with no heirs, you are working and you're doing it hard. You might be a laborer, porter, potter, bricklayer, street cleaner, or, if your luck's truly sour, a sewer worker. Rome needs a lot of things: roads, aqueducts, temples, baths, and someone has to build them. That someone, you with your bare hands under the sun, wearing sandals that provide all the arch support of a soggy leaf. The Roman workday starts early, very early. The sun is barely up, but the foreman already is yelling in Latin and waving a stick. If you're late, your doctor days pay, or worse, beaten, shamed, or fired, which in Roman terms means you starve with honor. Your tools are basic. You dig with a shovel made of splinters and prayer. Carry bricks on your back to haul water from a cistern that smells like old socks and ambition. There are no gloves, no helmets, just sweat, dust, and the constant awareness that one slip might crush your spine and your career simultaneously. And if you're a craftsman, good luck. You're competing with hundreds of others, selling the same clay pots, sandals, or cheap tunics. Underpricing is common, and quality doesn't matter if a richer citizen decides he doesn't like your face. Even more elevated jobs like messenger, accountant, or teacher aren't glamorous. You're either running through Rome's chaotic streets with scrolls under your arm, writing numbers for someone who will forget your name, or trying to teach Latin to a group of senators' children who already think they're gods. Women, they're working too, spinning, weaving, selling vegetables, or managing stalls in the markets, plus raising children, plus managing the household, plus not dying during childbirth, multitasking before it was cool. And after all this, you get a short break for lunch. Maybe if your supervisor isn't in a bad mood or trying to impress a visiting prefect. So yes, you work or you die trying. Rome may be eternal, but your back won't be. So you've made it through the morning without fainting or being flogged. Now it's time to navigate the ancient Roman street, a chaotic, crowded gauntlet designed by someone who clearly hated personal space and public health. Picture it. The sun's high, the city's buzzing, and the street is alive, not in a poetic way, in a literal way. Rats, flies, stray dogs, livestock, beggars, merchants yelling in 6 languages, children running wild, thieves pretending to help old ladies while pocketing your coin purse. It's like Times Square. If Times Square had no plumbing and everyone was carrying a goat. Let's talk infrastructure. Roman roads were engineering marvels, perfectly straight, masterfully paved, and usually overflowing with a blend of urine, spilled wine, vomit, animal waste, and the remains of last night's garum source. The middle of the street functions as an open sewer. Step off the raised footpath without looking, and congratulations. You've just baptized your sandal in the holy waters of human misery. Wagons clatter by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and zero chill. They don't stop for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law actually banned heavy cart traffic during the day in the city, which means drivers race through at night in the dark without brakes, like charioteers on a deadline. If you're not crushed by wheels, you'll be bumped by elbows, baskets, or an angry fishmonger shouting about spoiled eels. Then there's the air, thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense from temples, the scent of public latrines wafting on the breeze. Oh, and dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them there. If a dog drops in the forum, someone might just toss a cloth over it and walk away. And don't forget public spectacles, spontaneous brawls, impromptu protests, or a politician's parade that blocks traffic for hours while trumpet players blast off-key fanfare in your face. So, yes, the Roman street is alive and out to get you. Slip on a fig, get hit with a runaway cart, or accidentally offend a patrician's pet monkey, and your day could end faster than Caesar on the Ides of March. And you're sweaty, dusty, and desperately craving a splash of something cold. It's the good news. You live in Rome, a city renowned for its aqueducts. It's those magnificent engineering marvels that carry fresh water from the hills straight into the heart of the empire. The bad news, that water doesn't care about you, unless you're wealthy enough to live in a dois with your own private fountain. You're sharing water with thousands of your closest coughing, sneezing, not washing their hands neighbors. Your options are the public fountains, where everyone fills their jars, washes their feet, and occasionally dunks a child for fun or hygiene. And by hygiene, we mean a wet version of hope. If you want to wash up, your best option is the thermi, the Roman public baths. They're everywhere, and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, right? But here's the thing. The water cycles through multiple pools with no soap, no chlorine, and very little shame. You'll be sitting in a tepid bath with a dozen other men, none of whom believe in modesty. Conversations are loud, political, and occasionally naked. A man might try to sell you socks, while another cleans his ears with a stick. In the water, it's been through everyone. If you are hoping to feel clean, think again. You're marinating in bacteria with a hint of eucalyptus. Also, fun fact, the plumbing system often uses lead pipes. Yes, lead. Romans were obsessed with engineering, but not chemistry. Over time, that convenient indoor plumbing could cause all kinds of delightful side effects like anemia, gout, infertility, and, if you're truly lucky, madness. Want to drink something safer? Wine. Seriously, water is viewed with suspicion, especially in the poorer districts where contamination from latrines and street runoff is common. So, wine is diluted and consumed throughout the day by men, women, and children alike. Because what better way to survive a crumbling empire than with a gentle buzz? So, yes, Rome brought water into the city before most of the world knew what a pipe was. But for the average citizen, it's a gamble. Every time you drink, bathe, or rinse your toes, enjoy your aqueducts. Just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't just a possibility. It's the background music of your entire life. You stub your toe. No ice, no painkillers. Grit your teeth and keep going until it either heals wrong or falls off. Break a bone, wrap it in a dirty rag, and try not to breathe too hard. Get a splinter. Good luck. That's how infections start and how you might end. Roman society isn't big on comfort. There are no ergonomic tools, no padded seats, no concept of taking it easy. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a prayer. If you're a soldier, you march 20 meters a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite on your thigh. If you're a woman in childbirth, well, welcome to agony. Your midwife might know a chant. That's about it. Every part of your body is one misstep away from becoming an open wound or a cautionary tale. And unless you live near a temple with a very dedicated priest, your best option is homemade ointments, herbal smoke, or simply ignoring the problem until it resolves itself, or you get resolved into a grave. There's no such thing as anesthesia. Surgeries are performed while you scream into a block of wood. Dislocated shoulder is popped back in by a man named Marcus, who learned from watching someone else fail at it. Dental work. Picture a blacksmith. Now picture your mouth. That's the scene. And if you're enslaved or poor, people don't even pretend to care. You could be bleeding out on the side of the road, and the best you'll get is don't stain the mosaic. Even upper-class Romans embraced pain as proof of virtue. Stoicism was the philosophy of the day. Enduring suffering without complaint was seen as noble. If you cried over a broken arm, you weren't just in pain. You were weak. Real Romans suffer silently, then write poetry about it later. So yes, pain is always on the table, and it usually comes without warning, without remedy, and definitely without sympathy. On that cheerful note, let's take a look at what happens when you actually go see a Roman doctor. So, you've hurt yourself. Maybe it was the infected blister from yesterday's work. Or maybe you tried to shave with a bronze blade, and now your chin looks like a gladiator training ground. Either way, it's time to seek medical attention, which in ancient Rome is less about healing and more about surviving the attempt. Let's begin with the basics. Roman medicine is a chaotic mix of Greek theory, mystical guesswork, and a surprising amount of leaves. The core belief: the body is ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling off. One of them is out of balance. The solution: drain something. So your doctor, who may or may not also be your barber, immediately reaches for the leeches or a knife, because bloodletting is the default treatment for everything from migraines to moral failings. Have a cough. Let's open a vein. Depressed, we'll just drain some sadness out of your arm. Surgery. Oh yes, it exists. Roman surgeons had scalpels, forceps, and even bone drills. What they didn't have were anesthetics. You stay conscious through the whole procedure, gripping the edge of a wooden table, while a man in a dirty toga digs into your flesh with the confidence of someone who once saw a scroll about it. Antiseptics, not really a thing. They might wash wounds with wine or vinegar, which does help, but also burns like divine punishment. Infection is a common side effect. So is death. Prescriptions vary wildly. You might be given honey, garlic, crushed beetles, or a pus made of herbs, ash, and very specific types of animal dung. If things get worse, you're advised to sleep in a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope divine dreams will deliver your cure. And if none of it works, well, your doctor shrugs, your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start whispering about what kind of omen your death might be. It's not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't quite figured out what helped and what murdered you more efficiently. Next time you sneeze, be grateful for modern antibiotics, and that you don't live in a world where healing often starts with blood loss after a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging carts. You're starving. Time for dinner, or as the Romans called it, sinner. Just don't expect anything remotely comforting. Oh man. Let's start with what's not on the table. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no chocolate, no sugar, and absolutely no coffee. None of those things have been discovered or imported yet. This isn't Italian cuisine. This is pre-eat-able survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl, something brown and vaguely hot. It's probably pulse, a porridge made of spelt beans or lentils. Okay. It tastes like wet gravel, with a hint of herb if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, it tastes like wet gravel without the herb. Protein is rare unless you caught it, trapped it, or fished it yourself. Meat is expensive, and even when you do get some, it's often off. Roman cooking didn't use refrigeration, so preservation meant heavy salting, smoking, or marinating it in garum, fermented fish sauce that smells like dead ocean and burns your soul just thinking about it. If you're feeling festive, there might be boiled vegetables, hard cheese, or the occasional fig. Rich Romans dined on exotic dishes like roasted flamingo. That doesn't numb you enough. There's always more wine. Now, let's take a walk through justice, Roman style. Spoiler, it's not comforting. You've survived work, dinner, and a gladiator getting impaled for applause. You might think you're safe now, that as long as you keep your head down, the law will protect you. That's adorable. In Rome, the law doesn't protect. It reminds you that you're small, replaceable, and that mercy is a luxury reserved for statues of emperors. First off, legal status matters. If you're a citizen, you have rights. In theory, you can't be flogged in public unless someone important gets really annoyed and you get a proper trial. Okay, if you're a non-citizen, justice comes in the form of a fist, a branding iron, or a swift execution outside the city gates. Slaves, they are property. If a slave murders their master, even if the master deserved it, every slave in the household might be executed just to send a message. That message, don't even think about it. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a calm chat with a lawyer. Trials of public theater. The wealthier party brings witnesses, bribes, and dramatic gestures. You bring your tunic and a sinking feeling. If you cry on cue, that might help. If you have no patrons, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate isn't hung over. Punishments are designed not just to hurt, but to deter. Thieves can be branded or have their hands broken. Liars might get their tongue pierced, clawed, public flogging, or exile if you're lucky. And if you insult the emperor, it's not jail time, it's death, usually creative. Some crimes require public punishment, ideally in front of a crowd that cheers louder than they did for the morning's beheading. Crucifixion is popular, long, slow, humiliating. 8 isn't reserved just for Jesus. It's the go-to for rebels, robbers, and anyone the state wants to make an example of. And remember, law enforcement isn't there to help. The vigils are Rome's version of firefighters and police, underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. If you're mugged, they might shrug. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. So, yes, Rome has laws written in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, not justice. Now, let's talk about gods, because you're not just obeying men here. You're on Jupiter's turf. After surviving the streets and dodging Roman justice, you may hope to find comfort in religion. A little peace, a little personal spirituality. Nope, not here. In the Roman Empire, religion isn't a private affair, it's an institution. An ever-present cloud of incense and obligation wrapped around every waking moment of your life. You don't choose your gods, they choose you. And there are so many. There's a god for everything. Door hinges, cardia, sewers, closina, boundaries, terminus, and even mildew robus. You can't walk 5 paces without crossing a shrine. If you don't pause to bow, light a candle, or mutter a prayer, you're not just being rude, you're inviting catastrophe. Maybe not today, but eventually. And when your roof collapses, everyone will nod and say, "Ah yes, he skipped the Saturnalia offering." Religious festivals fill the calendar, dozens per year. On those days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the air smells like roasting bull and wet marble. You attend out of piety, but also fear, because if the gods aren't honored properly, they'll retaliate with plagues, droughts, or a really bad harvest. that ruins everyone's lentil supply. Now, let's talk about emperor worship. The state wants you to revere the emperor, not just as a ruler, but as a living god. You're expected to offer incense at his altar, sing his praises, and never roll your eyes during a triumphal procession. That's treason adjacent. If you're caught not participating in public worship, say you're a little too quiet during the Vestalia, or you don't show up to toss grain into the temple flame, you could be labeled impious, atheistic, or, worst of all, suspicious. Suspicion in Rome is like blood in shark-infested waters. If you're part of a foreign cult, you'd better keep that under wraps, unless it's officially approved. The state doesn't like sandal strap placement could make or break you. Roman society is a ladder, but it's covered in oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senators, old money, toggers with purple stripes, and land ownership so vast it has its own postal code. Below them, the equestrians, the wealthy business class. Then come the plebeians like you, the struggling middle and lower classes. Below that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus once. Want to move up? You'll need patrons, okay? Powerful individuals will protect you in exchange for lifelong loyalty, errands, favors, and the occasional vote. It's like having a boss, godfather, and landlord rolled into one charmingly condescending package. Each morning, you visit your patron's home as part of the solugio. You wait in line with other clients, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, then beg for a favor, usually money, food, or a recommendation. If you're lucky, he tosses you a coin and lets you carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you're now connected. Every gesture is measured, every glance assessed. Your tunic doesn't need to be stylish, just spotless. Speak with care, surround yourself with the right allies, and for Jupiter's sake, never look too ambitious. Success attracts envy, and envy in Rome is fatal. Rise too fast, and rivals will drag you down by rumor, by politics, or by steel. Here, networking is combat, gossip is coin, and a misplaced joke at dinner can sink your prospects. The right marriage, that's your lottery ticket. Not for love. Love is a poet's disease, but for land, titles, and alliances. But fortune is fickle. A poor harvest, a botched sacrifice, or one rival to jealous, and everything you built can vanish overnight. Daggers don't give warnings. Now the sun slides beneath Rome's rooftops. For a moment, you think the chaos might fade. That night will offer peace. Wrong. Darkness in Rome isn't quiet, it's sharper, hungrier, more dangerous. Light is scarce, unless you're wealthy enough to waste oil. You navigate alleys by moonlight and memory. Trip once, and instead of help, you're robbed of your shoes. The vigils patrol in theory, but in practice, they're tired, bribable, and hopelessly outnumbered. Thieves, drunks, and the occasional gladiator prowl the streets, and if you're walking home alone, you're nothing but prey. And then comes fire, the city's greatest nightmare. Those towering insulae you call home, a little more than kindling stacked sky high. A single overturned lamp can erase a neighborhood before dawn. The fire brigade? Buckets and prayers. The Great Fire of 64 CE proved just how fast Rome could burn. You think you're safe until you smell smoke at midnight, clutch your only tunic, and race down a staircase already collapsing beneath your feet. Noise fills in the rest. Revelers stagger from taverns, chanting bad verses and breaking bottles. Priests march with drums for gods you've never heard of. A senator's mistress wails, and half the district hears it. Sleep is rare, silence rarer still. Security belongs to the rich, the armed, and the blessedly lucky. Everyone else survives on hope, and yet you endure. You woke in a crumbling insula, braved filthy latrines, dodged carts, gladiators, and spoiled eels. You drank watered wine to escape poisoned pipes, bowed before gods you don't trust, obeyed laws that don't guard you, and tried to rest while riots rats, and midnight executions rattled outside your door. That's life in Rome. You don't live it to survive it. You're dirty, tired, possibly infected, and emotionally scarred by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Would you last another? Honestly, no, you wouldn't. Most modern humans, with our air conditioning, antibiotics, and 5-minute delivery windows, would crumble by lunchtime. You'd give up before the second round of garum. And yet, the Romans did it for centuries. 'Cause here's the maddening, magnificent thing. In the middle of all this filth, brutality, and noise, Rome worked somehow. They built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and amphitheaters. They expanded their empire across continents. They administered laws, developed philosophy, mapped the stars, performed surgeries, and invented concrete. Concrete, that stuff still holds up better than most modern buildings. They created systems that shaped Europe and beyond for 2,000 years. Latin became the root of half the languages you hear today. Their architecture inspired cathedrals, parliaments, and college campuses. Their political concepts, republics, senates, veto power still echo through modern democracies, but it came at a cost. For the average Roman, not the emperors, not the marble-bathed elite, daily life was a hard-fought grind, and yet they endured. They adapted. They didn't have a choice, because Rome wasn't made of gold. It was made of sweat, fear, ambition, and survival. Layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. And that's why it lasted. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You'd trade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back on it. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone somewhere once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire. So you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified. Imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. You've got royal blood in your veins, a name fit for legend, Radagon, and more importantly, you live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinner parties. Radagon wasn't born into peace and pearls. She was born into grit, horses, and the constant possibility that someone might poison your dates. Her father, Mithrates II, was no idle king. He was the one who expanded Parthia from a dusty French kingdom into a formidable empire that would one day spar with Rome. But expansion comes with problems, namely rebellions, betrayals, and those neighbors who just won't accept that. Your army now owns their backyard. As a young woman, Radagon would have grown up watching envoys argue, commanders draw maps in the sand, and palace scribes tried to keep track of who was loyal this week. She wasn't trained just in silk and ceremony. She learned statecraft, command, presence, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with her earrings. It's important to understand the role of Parthian women here. While not always given the spotlight, Parthian noblewomen were no strangers to power. Some ruled cities, others plotted dynastic alliances, and a few, like Radagon, became legends, not for who they married, but for who they defeated. And defeat she did. But that part comes later. At this point in her life, Rodin's name was already known. She was a symbol, not just of royal lineage, but of Parthian pride. She carried with her the expectation that she'd either marry a king or become one in spirit. She didn't seem content with sitting on the sidelines while cities burned or provinces rebelled. While most royal ladies were being oiled and perfumed, Radagon was likely brushing up on military reports and court logistics. She had no time for vanity, and, as fate would have it, she would one day make a vow that involved not washing her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Spoiler alert, it took a while. But before we get to that dusty crown moment, we need to understand what kind of rebellion dares provoke a princess who would rather lead troops than wear gold. The Parthian Empire, grand as it appeared on the map, was more duct tape than marble, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the edges of Mesopotamia and beyond. It was stitched together by marriages, oaths, and the occasional sword pressed firmly against someone's neck. So, when a rebellion flared up in the western provinces, likely in Media or Babylonia, it wasn't exactly surprising. What was surprising was how bold the rebels were. These weren't just disgruntled tax evaders. These were full-blown aristocrats and city leaders, angry at the central power and perhaps emboldened by the young age or absence of a male royal enforcer. They didn't just throw a fit, okay? They took fortresses, silenced Parthian envoys, and essentially told the crown to go polish its own sandals. Now, under ordinary circumstances, the king would have dispatched a general or a cousin with too much ambition and too little brains. But these weren't ordinary circumstances, for reasons still debated by historians. Maybe timing, maybe logistics, maybe sheer royal defiance. Radagon herself took command, and not just in the abstract, I'll approve the battle plans kind of way. No, she got on a horse, donned armor, and made a public vow that would become the stuff of legend. She would not wash, comb, or otherwise tend to her hair until the rebellion was crushed. It was bold. It was dramatic. It was frankly a nightmare for court stylists. But that vow, dramatic as it sounds, wasn't vanity. Kana, it was a declaration. A visual symbol that tied her personal dignity to the fate of the empire. Every time someone saw her tangled, dust-laden hair, they'd be reminded, this isn't over until we win. And that worked. Soldiers rallied. The troops didn't just see a princess, they saw a commander who was literally letting her beauty decay with the war. She embodied Parthian resilience, the kind that didn't rely on thrones, but on thorns, dust, and sweat. Meanwhile, the rebels probably didn't know whether to laugh or panic. They had expected a general, maybe a diplomat. Instead, they got a furious, unwashed woman who was riding straight for their gates, with steel in her eyes and no time for conditioner. And worse, she meant business. When Radagon set out from the capital, she wasn't escorted by a lavish court parade or showered in rose petals. She was accompanied by cavalry, grit, and the weight of an empire that needed its rebels squashed like an overripe fig, and she looked the part. Gone were any signs of courtly delicacy. Her hair, famously unkempt, began to take on a life of its own, hanging like a banner of war-torn determination. In a world obsessed with appearances, she turned her own into a weapon. The campaign was not swift. It wasn't a single siege, easily resolved with a bribe and a battering ram. The rebel cities were fortified and confident. They had expected hesitation from the central power, not a battle-hardened woman galloping through the dust with fire in her gaze. But Radagon didn't waver. Her military instincts were sharp, perhaps sharper than many of the men who had led before her. She employed classic Parthian strategies: mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run raids. Forces would appear at the edge of a rebel-held city, vanish like smoke, and return a day later from an unexpected flank. Reports suggest her soldiers admired her not just as a symbol, but as a tactician. She didn't linger behind the safety of her ranks. She fought in the vanguard, mud under her nails and fire blazing beneath her helm. As the campaign dragged on, so did her hair. By the third month, it had knotted in two coarse ropes, heavy with sweat, dust, and whispered prayers muttered before dawn charges. To her foes, the sight was dreadful. To her soldiers, divine. They named her the Witch Queen not for sorcery, but because no noble woman should still be in the field, armor dented, skin unwashed, refusing comfort. Surely, the rebels whispered, something unnatural kept her going. But there was nothing mystical about it, just raw, merciless resolve. By the time her banners flew outside the final rebel citadel, her name carried farther than the revolt itself. Its taverns buzzed with jests that the enemy feared not Parthian steel. but the thought that Rhodogon would never cleanse herself again, and perhaps there was truth in it. The last bastion loomed ahead, a fortress swollen with stolen grain, its gates braced, its walls bristling with archers. Inside, traders swaggered with smug certainty, convinced they could outlast her siege. A fatal error, for, by now, her presence was myth. Even the enemy spoke of the woman who will not wash. Rumor painted her hair as iron, her eyes sleepless, her body beyond fatigue. Legends multiplied like ladders against a wall. But Rhodogon was no phantom. She was flesh, bone, and strategy. Instead of hurling her men against stone, she starved the city into ruin-cutting supply lines, seizing couriers, fouling wells. Time itself became her blade. While the rebels withered behind their walls, she camped among her troops, eating their bread, drinking their thin wine, patrolling by torchlight. And through it all, she still refused to comb. What began as stubbornness became oath. Her tangled mane turned symbol, proof to every soldier that their suffering had meaning. Inside the city, hope fractured. The defenders, who had expected to break enemy morale, found their own collapsing. Famine crept in. Commanders argued. Men deserted. Cracks spread like frost through stone. And then came the slip. Small gate, left unguarded whether by exhaustion or betrayal, was discovered by her scouts. That night, beneath cover of storm and shadow, Rhodogon's warriors slipped inside and flung the gates wide. By dawn, the stronghold had fallen. On the walls, sweat-streaked and ash-covered, Rhodogon stood encamped, unbowed and utterly terrifying. Her triumph was not trumpeted, it was washed. Months of grime, battle, and siege ended not with parades, but with water. She summoned no courtly chamber, only a public square, and called her soldiers to bear witness. Basins were filled, oils prepared, combs laid out like sacred relics. And there, before the eyes of those who bled with her, Rhodogon cleansed her hair. Every knot undone was a city reclaimed. Every rinse of water carried rebellion into the dust. Some swore she wept, others that she laughed, but all agreed that the silence of hardened men watching was holy. No crown was needed. The filth itself had been her coronet, and the vow more precious than jewels. In that act, Pythia gained not just a princess, but an emblem. She might have marched straight to the capital, basking in scribal praise and noble adoration. Instead, she stayed among her troops, eating, listening, remembering. Then she chose the long road home, city by city, walking the streets she had freed, checking their defenses, stamping out the last sparks of rebellion. Rhodogon's legend was secure, not gilded by pomp, but etched in memory-tangled hair, steel discipline, and the woman who would not wash until victory was absolute. This wasn't mere ceremony, it was strategy. Rhodogon knew the danger of victory, how quickly it can melt into complacency. Empires don't fall from defeat alone. They fall from forgetting why they fought in the first place. She wanted the rebels and loyalists alike to understand that Pythian strength wasn't just cavalry and coin, it was embodied in her very presence. A woman who chose hardship over comfort and earned loyalty by example, not decree. In loyalty she received. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to gawk at royalty, but to stare in awe at her, not polished, not perfumed, but real. Can't. She didn't bring fear. She brought accountability. Can't. She asked for reports, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war coffers. She rewarded cities that had stayed loyal and offered clemency carefully, cautiously to those who repented. By the time she reached the royal court, her return had already become a legend. Scribes rushed to record her tale. Artists argued over how to capture her, wild-haired and battle-worn or radiant and reborn. Ministers whispered about the implications. A woman commanding armies, keeping oaths, and now standing at the heart of Pythian power, with the loyalty of half the provinces in her hand. And here was the dilemma. What do you do with a princess who is more popular than most kings. Some urged she be married off, as if that would contain her influence. Others wanted her placed in charge of border defenses permanently. But Radagon didn't seem concerned with titles or politics. She had proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne. The dust, her crown, and her name, already etched in the hearts of soldiers and citizens alike, needed no royal inscription to endure. She didn't need a coronation. She had already been crowned, not with gold, but with history. In the months following her campaign, Radagon didn't seek the limelight, but it followed her anyway. She became a subject of poetry, sculpture, gossip, and awe. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who'd fought under her command returned with a tale, and every tale made her larger, more enduring, more untouchable. Yet, in the palace halls of Phthia, where politics slithered like snakes behind silk curtains, her silence was unnerving. She didn't boast, she didn't lobby, she didn't ask for titles or lands. Instead, she observed, listened, and understood the real battlefield had only shifted from stone walls to whispered conversations. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the exact moment in the tangled Paphian dynastic timeline, had to tread carefully. Radagon wasn't just popular, she was respected in a way few men at court could compete with. Not adored for beauty or bloodline, but for leadership, for command. She had turned her vow into policy, her filth into folklore. And yet, the silence she kept was as deliberate as any military maneuver. She didn't tell others what she planned next, because perhaps even she didn't know. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting. She wasn't commanding troops or outwitting rebels. She was still, in that stillness, unnerved many. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Roden used this silence as leverage. Her presence alone, her every quiet nod or glance, forced decisions. Officials hesitated to propose bad policy for fear she'd frown. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping she might weigh in. Her silence wasn't passive. It was a tool. She had discovered that not speaking could be more powerful than speaking. And so she remained a living legend, walking the palace corridors, her freshly washed hair braided not just in gold thread, but in memory. Her very existence challenged the norms. She had proven that Paphian might wasn't confined to masculine hands, could ride into battle with tangled hair and return with cities at its feet. And all she had to do now was wait, because sometimes the greatest move is no move at all. As the years passed, Roden's name slowly faded from the formal records. Paphian scribes more eager to elevate kings and dynasties than unruly warrior princesses began to downplay her campaign. The silence she once used as a weapon now became the excuse for eraser. No grand mausoleum was raised in her name. No epic poem commissioned by the state bore her face on golden scrolls. But that's the thing about true legend. It doesn't need permission to survive. In the outposts where her army had marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained a whispered spell. Mothers told stories of her to their daughters, not as a fairy tale, but as a warning to any man who underestimated a woman with a mission. Soldiers recited her tactics as if they were sacred text and rebels. Well, even decades later, they still spoke of her as if she might ride again from the dust with hair flying like war banners. There's something profoundly unsettling about someone who breaks every rule of their time and still wins. Radagon wasn't content to be decoration in a court. She didn't play the flute, paint birds, or practice the refined art of being quietly ignored. She burned through her time like a comet, and then vanished just as quickly. Historians have debated what became of her. Some believe she retired from public life, choosing peace over politics. Others think she remained an advisor in the shadows, shaping Paphian strategy from behind the veil of anonymity. A few romantics claim she rode out one final time to settle a border dispute and disappeared into legend. Never confirmed, never denied. But what's certain is this: her legacy endured where it mattered most, in the people. She may not have worn the crown, but she ruled in ways no diadem ever could. She redefined what loyalty meant. She showed that a vow, even one as strange as refusing to comb your hair, could be as binding as a royal decree and far more inspiring. And though history books may offer her only a footnote, the dust of Pythias still remembers her, because you don't need a marble statue to be eternal. You just need to keep your vow and win. Centuries after her death, Radagon's story remains a paradox, well known in whispers, yet elusive in ink. No towering statue bears her likeness. No royal tomb sings her praises in carved stone. But in the collective memory of those who admire rebellion, endurance, and principled ferocity, she is immortal. Not in the way kings are remembered, but in the way forces of nature are. She didn't need to conquer foreign lands or sign monumental treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world where women were told to wait behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Roden tore the curtain down and marched out barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't ask for command. She took it, and the empire didn't collapse. Tia followed. More importantly, she taught her people a lesson that no decree could enforce, that loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from seeing your leaders suffer beside you, from watching them choose discipline over comfort, from watching them keep a vow longer than anyone thought possible. She wasn't perfect, no legend is, but her story endures, precisely because it wasn't polished or clean. It was tangled, muddy, honest, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that filth was dignity. In that vow was a vision of leadership stronger than any title. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the fight more than her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Pythia has crumbled and its cities turned to sand, her name returns in moments of resistance. Artists revive her. Writers search for her footprints, a vow not to wash until victory. It sounds absurd to some, but to those who've had to claw their way through injustice, it makes perfect sense. Radagon was never about glamour. She was about grit, And in the end, it was the dust that crowned her, not gold. Dust, the same substance emperors tried to escape in death, yet the very thing she wore like a badge of honor. She was forgotten by kings, ignored by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where legends truly live. Not in stone, but in soil, before empires clashed in blood-soaked sand, before kings trembled at her name. Tomius was simply a daughter of the wind, born to the raw, open steppe. The land she came from was not gilded in marble or echoing with philosophy. It was brutal, free, and endlessly vast. This was the world of the massage. Fierce nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains, their lives shaped by survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tomius's childhood, but we can imagine the rhythm of it. She would have learned to ride before she could run, to shoot before she could speak in full sentences. Among the massage, girls were not caged in tents or veiled by silence. They trained beside the boys, rolled with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed, and two, even as a young woman, bled for her people. Her tribe worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready for battle in the afterlife. They had no cities, no golden temples, but they had pride. And when enemies approached, they met them not with prayers, but with arrows. Tamius likely came to power after the death of her husband, who may have ruled the tribe before her. But what's certain is that when the moment came, she didn't inherit leadership. She seized it in a time when most women were considered property. Tamius commanded an army. She negotiated with kings. She dared to speak as an equal. and if they didn't listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahad, the steppes checkmate, a warrior chief in bronze and leather, who would soon face the greatest empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, never comes without consequence. As Tamias began to solidify her rule, whispers grew louder. Across the mountains to the south, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The stage was set. The steppe wind howled, and Tomias, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into legend. While Tomias reigned over the open steppes far to the south, a different kind of power was rising. Structured, imperial, relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia in the west and Babylon in the south. His banners flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where languages changed every few days' ride. But Cyrus wasn't done. He was a builder of empires, and every builder eventually eyes the horizon. To Cyrus, the Massage were a threat wrapped in opportunity. They weren't rich in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontier, and that meant access to key lands, resources, and trade routes. More importantly, the Massassi had something no empire could afford to ignore. Pride, and pride, in Cyrus's eyes, could be bent or broken. But Cyrus also knew that brute force wasn't always the best first move. He had a reputation for cleverness, diplomacy, and strategic trickery, so he tried a different approach, one that kings before him had used to dissolve threats without a single drop of blood. He proposed a marriage, according to ancient sources, notably Herodotus. Cyrus sent envoys to Tamiris offering an alliance through matrimony. On paper, it was a royal match. The great king of Persia and the warrior queen of the Massag. But Tamias wasn't naive. She saw the proposal for what it was. Not an offer of love or partnership, but a calculated attempt to absorb her people without a fight. She declined, and that rejection didn't sit well in the halls of Papilolis. With the diplomatic games over, Cyrus shifted to his favorite language, war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural barrier that separated Persia from the land of the Mesti. He was going to take what Tomias refused to give. But Tomias was already preparing. She knew the terrain. She knew how her people fought on horseback, fast and furious, and, most of all, she knew Cyrus wasn't just coming for land. He was coming to crush a woman who dared to say no. The world's most powerful king had declared war, but he had no idea what kind of fury he had just awakened on the steppe. Cyrus the Great, master strategist and seasoned conqueror, believed he could outwit us. He had faced kings, crushed cities, and subdued nations. To him, the Massage were little more than wild nomads with fast horses, and no cities to defend. He didn't realize he was stepping into the path of someone just as cunning and far more furious. Tamias had warned him. After rejecting his marriage offer, she sent a clear message. Cross the Araxes River, and you will regret it. But Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his army into Massai land. Instead of striking immediately, Tamias pulled her forces back, luring Cyrus deeper into unfamiliar terrain. Corpse. In every age, she became what people needed. A mother, avenger, a wild queen, a lesson in hubris, or a symbol of feminine power. But one truth cuts through the myth. She changed history. Tomias didn't inherit a throne. She forged it in fire and fury. And for one brief, unforgettable moment, the Steppe Queen proved that not all empires rise. Some fall to the hooves of warriors who ride with vengeance in their hearts. Much of what we know about Thomas comes not from local massage records. They left no stone tablets or royal archives, but from the pen of a Greek Herodotus, often called the father of that hunted with hawks that slept under the stars. A freedom that could not be neatly drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise from Kazakhstan's capital cities, and her face adorns coins and textbooks to modern Central Asians, she is a mother of nations, a link to a pre-Islamic, pre-Soviet, proudly nomadic past. A reminder that their identity wasn't born in submission, but in the cry of battle, in the gallop of horses. In a world still divided by power, by gender, by memory, Tamias is a beacon, not just because she killed a great king, but because she taught us something even greater. Potatoes, not given, it is seized. That sometimes leadership looks like a mother grieving her son and refusing to let the killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others vanish. Tomia survived because she was unforgettable. Because in a time when women were expected to disappear into the tents of men, she rose, blade in hand, fury in heart, and carved her story into the flesh of history. Kyres fall, statues crumble, but legends ride. And somewhere in the whispering winds of the steppe, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't a hobby, was a state-sponsored science with divine approval. Long before modern apiaries, Egyptians had already developed an organized mobile system for managing bees and extracting honey. By 2400 BCE, beekeeping was depicted in detail on the walls of tombs in the sun-drenched necropolises of Saqqara. It wasn't just about harvesting honey. It was a sacred practice embedded in agriculture, medicine, religion, and even the afterlife. The Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, typically stacked in rows and laid on their sides. These were nothing like modern wooden boxes. They looked. Mentions of bees and honey go back to the Sumerians. In Akkadian and Babylonian records, we even find words for apiaries bee enclosures, often placed within temple grounds or royal estates. That detail matters. Honey wasn't for everyone. It was controlled, managed, and counted. Both honey and wax moved easily between roles, sacred offering, medicine, food, and valuable trade good. A lost hive was more than a nuisance. It was an economic wound. The sharpest clue to how vital bees were comes from the Code of Hammurabi around 1750 BCE. Buried among laws about theft, farming, and contracts are a few lines about swarming and stolen honey. If your bees invaded a neighbor's field and caused damage, you were liable. If honey was stolen, repayment had to be made, sometimes in silver, sometimes in jars of honey itself. In a world where wealth was measured mostly in grain, the fact that honey earned its own legal protection says everything. To Mesopotamians, bees weren't just insects. They were charged with meaning. Some texts describe them as envoys of the divine, tied to Ninurta, the god of farming and war. It was an emblem of order itself, a mirror of law, and proof that even nature could be drawn into the human project of civilization. Far to the northwest, in the highlands of Anatolia, the Hittites saw bees differently. Long before Greece dominated the stage, these people made the hive a sacred ally. In their eyes, bees carried purity. They weren't just producers of honey, but mediators between humans and gods. Where Egypt and Mesopotamia leaned on economics and efficiency, the Hittites wrapped bees in ritual meaning. Texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE reveal bees summoned in purification rites. In one ceremony, a bee is invoked to carry away impurity, anger, and evil. The insect is then set free, not crushed. For an age that offered animals by the thousands, such restraint shows reverence. Honey, in turn, was woven into offerings and libations, anointing rites and feasts. It wasn't merely eaten, it was poured, burned, sanctified. Honey was a bridge between mortal intent and divine favor. Material traces suggest the Hittites used clay or straw hives, perhaps tube-shaped like those of their Levantan neighbors, kept in temple enclosures. Beekeeping likely fell under priestly control, folded into state and seasonal rituals. And while honey was sweet, it was also politically used in healing, sacrifice, and diplomacy alike. The bee itself became a symbol that outgrew its size. It tied texts, even note migration patterns, linking swarms to flowering cycles, evidence of careful observation. For them, the drone of the hive wasn't background noise. It was the pulse of the cosmos. When Greece rose, bees became both subject and symbol. The Greeks didn't simply keep them, they modeled thought upon them. The hive was a metaphor for the polis, the ideal city-state. Ordered, communal, disciplined, Greek innovation, advanced apiculture. Unlike earlier fixed hives, Greek terracotta models had removable sections, making harvests less destructive. With smoke piped through clay bellows, they load the hive before extracting comb, a discovery that allowed multiple yields without collapse. Tuttle himself studied bees obsessively. In History of Animals, he cataloged hive behavior, recognizing specialized roles among workers and defenders. Hay misnamed the queen as a king, but his work framed centuries of inquiry. Meanwhile, saturated Greek life, it sweetened wine, preserved fruit, enriched cakes, and treated wounds. Philosophers believed ambrosia, the sustenance of God's wise, honey mixed with wine. Bees, too, carried mythic charge. They were linked to Artemis, to Demeter, two priestesses called Melissae bees in human form. The insect embodied the feminine divine, tireless, fertile, ordered. To study bees, the Greeks thought, was to glimpse the rhythm of nature itself, perhaps even the intentions of Olympus. Rome, as always, scaled what others revered. Where the Greeks watched in wonder, the Romans organized. Beekeeping became an imperial industry, stretching from Gaul to Hispania. Drawing on Etruscan and Greek precedent, Roman writers like Varro and Columella codified techniques into agricultural manuals, describing hive types, seasonal care, swarm management, even pest control. Roman hives varied: hollow logs, bark cylinders, clay tubes, baskets sealed with mud. Adaptation was key across climates. Smoke was made with herbs thyme, organ or both, to pacify bees and perhaps flavor honey. Harvesting used knives and strainers. Was melted and filtered for candles, writing tablets, seals, and waterproofing. Honey permeated Roman life. It was mixed into wine to make balsam, baked into breads, drizzled on meat, and carried by athletes as an energy source. Physicians prescribed it for coughs, fevers, and wounds. Villas often housed large-scale apiaries run by enslaved labor, tracked in ledges, their products flowing into markets and exports. To the Roman mind, bees were citizens in miniature, obedient, productive, vital to order. A hive was a household, scaled and idealized. Across all these civilizations, the bee hovered at the edge of the divine. In Egypt, they were born from Ra's tears. In Mesopotamia, they served as messengers of gods. In Anatolia, they cleansed evil. In Greece, they became priestesses. In Rome, they mirrored the empire itself. Was never just sweetness. Was law, ritual, medicine, offering, symbol. The hum of the hive carried more than sound, it carried meaning, binding nature to culture, the mortal to the eternal. Honey found its way into the sacred heart of ritual. In Egyptian temples, it was poured out to honor gods and placed with the dead to guide them safely into eternity. The bee itself rose as a royal emblem. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title He of the Sedge and the Bee, fusing political authority with the order and balance symbolized by the hive. Across the Mediterranean, Greek culture layered bees with feminine divinity. Priestesses of Demeter and Artemis, guardians of fertility in wilderness, were called Melissae, literally bees. These women were seen as living bridges between mortal and divine. Some traditions even held that Delphi, long before Apollo, was tended by the priestesses. And the Pythiath, the famed Delphic oracle, was sometimes hailed as the Delphic bee. Its philosophers, the hive itself was a model of cosmic perfection. Unified, tireless, harmonious, thinkers and mystics alike compared its society to the ideal, disciplined, cooperative, and reverent. Stoic philosophers admired bees for their instinctive obedience to duty. Later, Christian writers adopted the same metaphor, praising bees as symbols of chastity and resurrection, creatures that created abundance without lust, and whose life cycle hinted at rebirth. Far older traditions added further layers. In Mesopotamian incantations, bees carried away ritual impurity. In Hittite purification rites, a living bee was set free after symbolically absorbing the sins of the community. Honey and wax were cast into sacred flames, worked into amulets, and written into spells meant for protection and healing. For ancient peoples, bees were not merely insects. They were liminal beings, creatures of hidden spaces, givers of golden food, defenders who stung only in need. Embodied miracle and mystery alike. Honey's divinity extended to medicine. Long before anyone named bacteria, healers knew instinctively that honey closed wounds, soothed coughs, and preserved flesh. To many, it seemed alchemy, yet its powers were chemical. Natural acidity, antimicrobial enzymes, and hydrogen peroxide. Egyptian physicians placed honey at the core of their remedies. The Ebers Papyrus c. 1550 BCE lists it in over 500 recipes. Honey mixed with figs, milk, garlic, or resins treated infections, stomach ailments, and burns. They knew that wounds covered with honey resisted rot and healed more swiftly. Greek physicians carried the practice forward. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, prescribed honey for ulcers, fatigue, and breathing troubles. He blended it with vinegar into oxymel to cut phlegm and lower fever. Greek athletes drank honey water to restore strength faster than wine or water alone. In India, Ayurveda praised madhu, classifying it by taste and potency. Texts warned against heating it, but endorsed it for indigestion, coughs, wounds, and even antidotes to poison. Honey was also sacred, offered to gods, consumed in fast, purifying body and soul alike. Rome followed suit. Pliny the Elder listed honey in dozens of treatments, from laxatives and gargles to battlefield salves. Mixed with poppy, it calmed pain. Applied directly, it reduced swelling. Surgeons carried honey into war as a frontline medicine. Beeswax, too, was indispensable, molded into plasters, fillings, and protective salves, prized for its resistance to decay. To ancient healers, honey was not luxury, was survival. Beekeeping itself demanded innovation. Far from simple harvesters, ancient apiarists were craftsmen, experimenters, and careful students of nature. Hive design was one of their greatest advances. Egyptians favored long clay cylinder terracotta tubes stacked in rows, mimicking the hollow crevices bees sought in nature. Greeks and Romans used woven skeps and clay hives, some with lids or removable sections. This meant honey could be taken without destroying the colonia. Breakthrough in sustainability. Smoke became another essential tool. The Greeks crafted clay smokers and bellows to channel fumes into hive entrances. Smoke masked the alarm scent of guard bees, keeping them calm. Romans refined this, burning herbs like thyme and oregano to both pacify bees and subtly flavor honey. Bronze or wooden knives sliced the combs. Presses and strainers separated liquid honey from wax, which was melted and purified for candles, bombs, and writing tablets. Protection was minimal. No suits, just experience and careful hands. But they lacked in gear. They made up in observation. Ancient keepers tracked swarms, flowering cycles, and seasons. Some even practiced early transhumance, moving hives to follow blooms, much like today's migratory beekeepers. Storage, too, was vital. Egyptians sealed honey in ceramic jars, ensuring it kept for years or even centuries, as tomb finds prove. Honey's eternal shelf life was legendary. Just as important were rituals of respect. In many places, ceremonies were performed to honor the spirit of the hive, ensuring harmony. Spiritual observance mattered as much as tools in sustaining colonies. Beekeeping in antiquity was more than agriculture. It was craft, science, and devotion interwoven. The hives along the Nile, in Anatolia, in Greek temples, and Roman estates, all reflect a balance of reverence and pragmatism. Their techniques, sustainable harvesting, hive, innovation, smoke, and seasonal migration laid foundations for modern apiculture. This shaped the pharmacopoeias of Egypt, Greece, Rome, and India. Their metaphors shaped religion, philosophy, and myth. Honey was not only food, it was medicine, ritual, symbol, and survival. Bees themselves stood as models of order and bridges between worlds. The legacy of those keepers lingers. Migratory beekeeping remains central to agriculture. Honey's healing powers remain respected. The hive still inspires metaphors of unity and balance. And though technology has advanced, the relationship between humans and bees endures unchanged. Humanity depends on bees for sustenance, health, and ecosystem balance. Bees, in turn, shaped civilizations civilizically and scientifically. The hum of the hive, first heard in the Bronze Age, still echoes as proof that even the smallest of creatures can bind together worlds. Hieroglyphs weren't locked into one reading style. They could run left to right, right to left, or even top to bottom, depending entirely on the scribe's mood that day. The trick to decoding them was simple. Look at the direction the birds or people face. If they look right, you read right. If they look left, you read left. And if they're upside down, good luck. But here's the thing. Learning hieroglyphs wasn't for everyone. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of Egyptians could actually read and write. To join that elite group, you had to become a scribe. And that meant starting as a child, spending years memorizing hundreds of symbols, copying scroll after scroll, and writing until your hand cramped into a permanent claw. Brutal training, but the reward was massive. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and shielded from the back-breaking labor of hauling stone under the burning sun. Instead, they handled tax records, letters, court cases, and sacred texts. They were the quiet power brokers of Egypt, living proof that writing was strength. For everyone else, though, writing wasn't just communication, it was magic. Hieroglyphs were sacred, symbols that carried divine force. Scribing someone's name could preserve their soul forever. Erasing it, that was spiritual annihilation. So, yes, spelling in Egypt was literally a matter of life and death. Hieroglyphs may look like ancient emoji, but in reality, they were a puzzle box of meaning, packed with mythology, mathematics, and mystery. Beautiful, absolutely, easy, not a chance. After enduring chapters of heat, hunger, endless sand, superstition, and bone-crushing work, it is time to ask the real question. Could you survive even one day in ancient Egypt? Honestly, probably not. It's tempting to romanticize that world gleaming golden tombs, lotus-scented air, graceful hieroglyphs, animal-headed gods, and a culture obsessed with beauty and order. But behind the monuments and art, everyday life was brutal. A typical Egyptian morning began on a dirt floor, surrounded by flies, smoke, and livestock. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. You trudged barefoot across blazing sand, carried water, cooked over open flames, and lived in cramped quarters with no medicine, no privacy, and no relief from disease or hunger. Your worries weren't just earthly. Divine punishment loomed over every misstep, and your very afterlife depended on passing the God's judgment. Forget antibiotics, painkillers, sunscreen, plumbing, or even a second pair of clothes. And once you were born into a class, that was your life. No upward mobility, no reinvention. You were a farmer, a builder, a servant, or you were nothing. And yet, the Egyptians weren't miserable. Far from it. They found joy in music, festivals, family, food, and faith. They believed deeply in their gods, their purpose, and in the eternal beauty of existence. They laughed, danced, painted, and dreamed of eternity so vividly that they carved their visions into stone monuments that still defy time. But let's be real. Take away your AC, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your phone, and you'd collapse before the second sandstorm rolled in. No, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt, but they lasted millennia. And that endurance is exactly why their civilization still fascinates us today. Across the ocean, in ancient, another story of grandeur and terror rises from the stones. One pyramid in particular refuses to be forgotten. Unlike the serene temples of Egypt, this one stares back at you with open-mouthed stone serpents, frozen mid-strike, fangs bared, eyes wide. This is the temple of the feathered serpent, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl. But unlike other temples that stretch reverently toward the heavens, this one radiates menace. From the moment you approach, you feel that the serpents aren't decoration. They're warnings. What happened beneath them was even darker. Excavations revealed not just offerings, but hundreds of human sacrifices. Over 200 bodies, many decapitated, hands bound, warriors laid in precise formations. Some had obsidian blades at their sides. Others wore grisly ornaments made of human teeth and jawbones. This was no mass grave, it was ritual, a deliberate act of cosmic balance, carved in blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a shrine. It was a stage where rulers fused religion, warfare, and terror to control a city of more than 100,000 souls. For blood wasn't horrid, was necessity. And yet, the mystery deepens, because, for all its power, left us almost nothing to explain itself. No king's names carved into stone, no written records. We don't even know what the builders called themselves. Later, Aztecs named it the place where gods were born, standing in the Avenue of the Dead, surrounded by pyramids that scraped the sky. You start to see why. At its height, was one of the largest cities on Earth, rivaling Rome and Alexandria, yet it remains an enigma. A colossal civilization, built with precision, ruled by, a council, a priesthood, something we still don't fully understand. Evidence of Teotihuacan's power has been found hundreds of miles away from the Maya. Cities of Teco and Copan to the distant Zapach capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic styles, murals, and even political meddling. In one case, Teotihuacan emissaries may have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were tools of control, aligning perfectly with astronomical events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice, and reminding every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in sync. At the heart of it all stood the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. To understand the temple, you must first understand the deity it was dedicated to, the Feathered Serpent. Known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl and to the Maya as Calcan. This figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. Centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the Feathered Serpent was already a central, possibly supreme divine force. But here's the paradox. What kind of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that. Serpents slither through the underworld, lay shed their skin, symbolizing rebirth, duality, and death. Birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, representing freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To combine these two, earthbound and sky-dwelling, death and life, chaos and order, was to create something entirely cosmic, something terrifyingly powerful. The Feathered Serpent wasn't just a god, he was a bridge between worlds. On the facade of the temple, carved in deep relief. We see dozens of his images. Goggle eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they're warriors or priestly figures adorned in divine regalia to signal their authority. Either way, they are everywhere. The temple is covered in these snake-bird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathes with the divine presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens, it was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion. Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind. But to bring life from death, there had to be a trade. The gods sacrificed themselves for humanity, and humans in return were expected to do the same. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a monument to faith. It was a cosmic engine designed to link the sky, the earth, and the underworld through ritual. Every stone, every serpent head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacan didn't just worship the feathered serpent. They embodied his logic, paradox, power, and blood. And the most disturbing truths were hidden beneath the surface. For centuries, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent stood silently, a weathered, imposing structure, half swallowed by time. Locals whispered legends. Scholars made guesses. But no one could have imagined what was buried beneath its layered stones until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations were a series of long, sealed chambers and pits, each filled with carefully arranged human remains. These weren't the messy results of war or disease. These were deliberate sacrifices, systematic, ritualistic, cold. The victims, numbering over 200, were young men, many between 15 and 25. Some wore necklaces made of human jawbones. Others had their hands tied behind their backs. A few were decapitated. Obsidian knives, sharp and black as night, were scattered nearby, the unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They weren't buried randomly. They were placed in quadrants, cardinal directions, possibly to mirror the cosmos. Even the number of bodies mattered. It wasn't just about death. It was about meaningful death. Offerings surrounded the victims. Jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the distant Gulf Coast, figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in battle. This wasn't punishment. It was a gift. These young men, most likely warriors, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. To the Teotihuacanos, the very act of building a temple may have required human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood. Every layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper you dig, the more sacrifice you find. In one chamber, archaeologists discovered elaborate tunnels filled with mercury and mystical materials associated with the underworld. The floor glimmered like water. Was this a symbolic passage to the land of the dead, a mirror of the night sky? The more they excavated, the more it felt like the temple was not built on top of death, but constructed to encase it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was meant to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. Look closer at the temple of Ty, the feathered serpent, and you'll notice something strange, something unnerving. It doesn't just sit on the landscape, it aligns with the universe. Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire city was laid out along precise cosmic axes. Its central avenue of the dead runs at a 15 angle off true north. Not a mistake, but a deliberate shift, possibly to align with the setting of the Pleiad star cluster or the sun on specific ritual dates. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits directly along this avenue, locking it into a grand celestial blueprint. But why? What were they trying to align with? Archaeologists and art coasters have debated this for decades. Some suggest the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others argue it connects to Venus, the planet most sacred to Mesoamerican civilizations, often associated with war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When Venus rose or set, wars were declared, offerings made, and temples activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's dimensions seem intentional. The repetition of the number 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its step platforms. Their symmetry, rhythm, and a stunning understanding of both earthly, math, and cosmic cycles. And beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple. Not a crude passage, but a deliberately constructed subterranean world. The walls were once covered in powdered pyite, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light, like starlight. Combined with mercury pools and microlined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to replicate the cosmos itself. To walk through it would be like traveling through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey to the underworld, or perhaps to rebirth. Was this temple not just a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, a portal that aligned earth, sky, and the spirit realm? Some scholars believe Tayoti saw time as circular, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an eternal cycle. Death leading to renewal, sacrifice fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped predict celestial movements, coordinate harvests, and more importantly, time when to offer blood. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just looking at the stars, it was trying to speak to them. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very design was meant to overwhelm, to intimidate, to remind every viewer, local or foreign, who held the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow 1,800 years ago. You, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already Eric by the sheer scale of Teotihuacan. But when you reached the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, you'd freeze. The serpent heads stare at you, their fangs bared. Jaguar symbols growled from the stone. The plaza ahead once held massive gatherings, not just for celebration, but for public ritual. You might even witness a sacrifice. The ruling elite of Teotihuacan understood something crucial. Fear is power, and nothing stirs fear like divine wrath. By orchestrating ritual executions in broad daylight, surrounded by cosmic symbols and death imagery, they sent a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid to feed them. But this wasn't chaos. This was theater. Priests in feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and spill blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. They alone could open the heavens or summon rain, protect the people, or destroy their enemies. Even the architecture helped reinforce this propaganda. From the temple's upper tiers, leaders could look down upon the plaza. They controlled not just the narrative, but the very physical space in which it unfolded. The people looked up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and knew their place. And for outsiders, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry home tales of awe and terror. They would speak of the feathered serpents, the endless avenues, the blood rituals that lit the sky red. In a world where gods ruled through fear, Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen mouthpiece, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its peak, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood. a city that seemed destined to last forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed. Something broke, okay? And the silence that followed was as chilling as the temple's stone serpent heads. The fall of Teotihuacan was not loud and glorious. It was gradual, then sudden. Signs of strain began appearing decades earlier. Signs that the cosmic engine was faltering. Evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failure, and social unrest. The very systems that had sustained this grand city, centralized power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crack under pressure. Okay. And then came the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered widespread burn layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative buildings, including signs of violent destruction at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. What's strange is that the lore says residential areas were mostly untouched. This wasn't an external invasion. This was an uprising, a rebellion, possibly from within. The very people who once watched sacrifices in awe may have risen against their priest kings. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Sculptures were defaced. Fires were set. Ritual spaces were desecrated. And then, silence. Teotihuacan wasn't completely abandoned overnight, but it lost its soul. Trade networks collapsed. Artistic production ceased. The great rituals stopped. The ruling elite disappeared. The temple no longer spoke. And yet, the mystery only deepened, because while the city faded, its memory endured. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were Eric. They believed gods had built this place. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own myths around its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin. It was a relic of divine truth. But the irony remains. The most powerful city of its time, built on cosmic order and blood, vanished without a written word, without a final record, leaving behind only stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet. For over 1,000 years, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried beneath layers of dust, volcanic ash, and silence. Locals avoided it, farmers tilled around it, and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology arrived and cracked open the secrets buried within its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began excavating Teotihuacan. What they found was astonishing: a perfectly engineered city, far older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to yield its most intimate and most chilling revelations. One of the most dramatic discoveries came in 2011, when researchers uncovered a sealed tunnel beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been deliberately closed off nearly 100 to 800 years earlier, as if to prevent anyone from entering ever again. After years of excavation, scientists unearthed a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pyat to mimic a starlit sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects: jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a tomb and more like a message. Why would the ancient builders go to such lengths? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some experts believe the tunnel was used in initiation rituals. Others suggest it symbolized the creation of the world, a mythological womb where gods were born, where kings were made, where divine order was negotiated between humans and the cosmos. The mercury, once thought to be only toxic, may have represented water or the fluid veil between worlds. And among all these glittering fragments was one persistent whisper. The feathered serpent still lingered, not just as a myth, but as a presence in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. The serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered. And with each excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden ornament, we draw a little closer to its message, carved not in language, but in stone, sacrifice, and shadow. Modern science has given us X-rays, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still keeps secrets. Today, the temple of the Fathered Serpent stands as a haunting monument, not just to a civilization long gone, but to a way of thinking that merged power, cosmos, and death into one unbreakable system. Tourists snap photos. Children run past the stone serpent heads, but the ground beneath their feet is soaked in 1,000 untold stories and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple endures. Its legacy is not just architectural, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and earth, continued to evolve. He would be adopted by the Toltecs, then reborn by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his myth took on a gentler tone. The bringer of knowledge, the god who wept for humanity, the one who vowed to return. This reimagining of the serpent god shows how myths don't die, they transform. Even in modern Mexico, echoes of the feathered serpent persist in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The temple's image has appeared on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian brilliance, and of the untamed spiritual world that once pulsed through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy, one less visible, more uncomfortable. The temple of the Fathered Serpent forces us to confront the price of belief. It asks hard questions. How far will humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty coexist with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't just a historical site, okay? It's a mirror, a reflection of us, our fascination with life after death, our hunger for meaning, our capacity to build monuments of staggering beauty and to stain them with blood. The temple teaches us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can soar to impossible heights while burying their secrets beneath the stones. And maybe that's why we keep returning, not just to visit, but to understand, because deep down we know the serpent is still watching, not to strike, but to remind us of what we once were and what we still might be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before the invention of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to create something that could only be described as sound with intention. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. A hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stomping earth in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something magical emerged. The first drum beat. It wasn't called music, it wasn't called anything, but it felt like something, like communication, like movement, like emotion taking form. Anthropologists have uncovered evidence of primitive percussion instruments dating back over 30,000 years. These were likely made from natural materials. Tree trunks, hollowed out gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing preserved. But these rudimentary drums were not toys or idle distractions. They served real purposes, to warn, to summon, to connect. Imagine a tribe scattered across a dense forest. One beat from a distant drum, and others knew danger is coming. Or a celebration has begun. Or the gods are listening. The earliest drums weren't just tools. They were extensions of the human body, a heartbeat externalized, a pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming wasn't something you watched or listened to. It was something you participated in together, around fires, under stars, in caves, where echoes made the air itself vibrate. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion, joy, grief, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Before the first flutes were carved, before stringed instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual, and uniting individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and perhaps its first form of collective identity. No matter where on earth people lived, they created something to strike, something to beat, something to mark the moment. Because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that rhythm was everything. In the cradle of early human civilization, drums were not just instruments, they were sacred voices. Every tribe, every culture, every corner of the earth developed its own rhythm. But the purpose was nearly universal, to commune with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums emerged, rhythm was deeply intertwined with life, death, and ancestry. The gam carved from a single tree and wrapped in goatskin was believed to contain three spirits. That of the tree, it was carved from the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life. Played in circles, the gem didn't just accompany rituals, it was the ritual. Then there were the talking drums capable of mimicking human speech through pitch and tone. In West Africa, these drums carried messages across miles, relaying news, warnings, births, and deaths from one village to the next. Long before the telephone, humans were already drumming their messages through the landscape. Across the oceans, Native American tribes treated the drum as a living entity. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, summon healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The large POW drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine, a communal pulse that aligned humans with nature and spirit. In Australia, the Aboriginal people used clapsticks and percussive stomps in the sacred Dreamtime, a mythic era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or communicating with spirits during long, dark winters. These weren't performances. These were acts of survival, healing, storytelling, and connection. The drum was to remember, the drum was to belong, and always it was communal. Drums brought people together into sacred circles, synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just bodies moving, hands striking, souls stirring, all unified by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood. If you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was happening. Something that words alone could never express. From sacred circles to bloody battlefields, the drum has always spoken, sometimes with comfort and sometimes with command. As human societies evolved into kingdoms and empires, drums transformed into tools of domination, instruments of order, and weapons of fear. The earliest armies didn't have radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, massive drums called bao were struck to coordinate troops across vast terrains. With a single resonant boom, commanders could signal a charge, retreat, or flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud, they were strategic. Each rhythm meant something specific, and trained soldiers knew how to listen, even through the chaos of battle. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public. But in times of conflict, they echoed through city walls, terrifying enemies with a deep, relentless thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a framed drum used in processions and by cults like that of Cybele, though not a battlefield instrument in the way horns and standards were. Carried symbolic power, a sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army wielded drums quite like the Ottomans. Their matab bands, the world's first known military orchestras, unleashed an overwhelming storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The relentless pounding of curse, giant kettle drums, and double-headed bass drums struck terror into the hearts of enemy forces. Some European accounts describe soldiers freezing in panic before even seeing the Ottomans paralyzed by sound. Drums also enforce power off the battlefield. The royal courts across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, underscored political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas used drums as tools of resistance. On plantations, rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped orchestrate secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refused to be silenced. So, whether it signaled divine right, military discipline, or raw fear, the drum has always carried a message. This is who rules. This is who marches. And this is the rhythm of power. As civilizations branched out across continents, so too did their rhythms, evolving in form, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums became tools of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned into military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two worlds, two paths, one heartbeat. Koi. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of divine language. The tabla, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was used in classical music and devotional performances, but it was more than accompaniment. It was conversation. Each stroke had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't just percussive, it was spoken poetry trained over decades. The tabla player was not just a musician, he was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the Dao drum emerged as a ceremonial giant, played in Shinto, rituals, theater, and war. Dao required not just technical skill, but physical discipline. The drummers moved with martial precision, their stances grounded like warriors. In festivals, the booming Tao echoed through mountain valleys, believed to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flows of gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers and musicians in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were layered, interlocked, and celestial, a sonic reflection of cosmic harmony. Across the world, in Europe, drums had a different story. They were largely utilitarian during the medieval period, signaling soldiers, marking time, enforcing discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque eras that drums began to enter formal music. Even then, they were kept in the background, coney thundering beneath royal fanfare or echoing in grand cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something tied to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to rally, march, and measure. But both understood the drum's core power, to shape time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or West, sacred or strategic, the drum remained central, always listening, always speaking. From mountaintop temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candlelit cathedrals, drums have always had a place where the human meets the divine. Long before organized religion took root, rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to summon, to transcend. Africa, drums were not just instruments, they were spiritual beings. In Yoruba traditions, for example, the batar drum was used to communicate with the Orisha's gods and ancestral spirits. Drummers weren't performers, they were priests. The rhythms they played were encoded prayers, inviting the gods to descend and dance among the living. Each pattern had a purpose, each beat a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of gods, but the deity, Shiva, in his form as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance of creation and destruction with a small, hourglass-shaped drum in hand. The damaru, its beat, represents the pulse of the universe itself. From silence to sound, from void to form, the drum is a divine heartbeat. In Buddhism, the ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Slow, soft strikes guide breath and awareness, acting like a metronome for the soul. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it simply reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the present moment. Across the Americas, indigenous tribes use drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. Its beat is constant, steady, mimicking the rhythm of the womb, helping participants enter trance states or connect with ancestral spirits. In these spaces, the drum doesn't just accompany prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, the drum still found a sacred role in gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches. Drums became a means of praise and power, a heartbeat behind voices lifted in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the God invoked, the drum has been there not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, its intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak. Because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments. One body, one sound, one purpose. 8. But in the heart of the industrial age, something revolutionary happened. In factories,